The Pentagon is currently amassing a strong air force for a large-scale attack against Iran, possibly with the aim of toppling the current regime. The United States ship Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is approaching the Middle East. Air defense systems such as Patriot and Terminal High Altitude Area Defense will also be deployed. Meanwhile, non-critical personnel and equipment of the United States are being evacuated from bases in the region that are considered exposed or easy targets. More than 36 United States tanker aircraft and large transport aircraft are also heading there. And the planning phase is gradually being replaced by actual implementation. But on the other hand, Iran is definitely not just sitting idly by. Cargo aircraft from Russia and China have been repeatedly flying to the country and are almost certainly carrying weapons and ammunition. And since the middle of 2025, Iran has started stockpiling weapons, especially those made in China. On paper, Iran really seems to have a modern air defense. This includes the HQ-90 missile, but in reality, this advantage is fragile. Air defense systems are only effective if they are interconnected and layered with other defenses, and Iran lacks this kind of integration. And from any angle you look at it, the situation is really dynamic, and the Pentagon is just waiting for the right moment. If the attack happens too early, the Iranians might unite and give even more support to their government. If it's too late, the United States could lose momentum. Half measures are not enough. This is the moment that could set the direction for the coming decades. And what happens afterward might be even more disastrous than what the people currently making decisions expect. Nowadays, conflicts between states no longer just happen on the battlefield. It also happens on the internet through cyber attacks, surveillance, and digital disruptions. And in this context, the internet itself becomes part of the battle. Now, before we begin, if you're new to our channel, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always be updated with our latest videos. So, back to the video. Right now, the ongoing protests in Iran are really intensifying the possibility of military intervention from the United States. Since January 8, internet connectivity in the country has been almost completely cut off. That's why it's really difficult to determine how widespread and severe the situation is. Even so, there are views that the protests are just being used as a reason or pretext for possible military action. It's true that there are Iranians on the streets who are calling for democracy, but if we look at it critically, this isn't really the main reason for America's interest. They say this isn't about promoting democracy or freedom. This can be seen in Trump's rhetoric regarding Venezuela, Ukraine, and Greenland, which shows his views on the so-called liberal rules-based order. At this point, the renewed intervention, America bombing Iran, is not supposedly due to a sudden crisis, especially not just because of the ongoing protests, but because of unresolved issues from the previous tensions between the two countries. In the first United States attack on Iran's nuclear sites, it was not considered a complete success. Approximately 400 kilos of 60% enriched uranium were not detected and were secretly moved by the Iranians a few months before the attack as preparation for the anticipated offensive. If this continues up to 90% enrichment, which some consider not that difficult to achieve, the current stockpile could produce enough fissile core for a nuclear weapon. And as long as that uranium remains missing or its location cannot really be determined, as long as Iran still has even a slight capability to build a bomb, the war cannot be considered over. Iranian diplomats are trying to prevent or at least delay a United States attack by offering to reopen negotiations with the Trump administration. If Iran offers a major concession on their nuclear program and their missile program, the possibility of military action from America may decrease. However, Washington's demands have expanded compared to the last tension between the two countries. It's no longer just about stopping uranium enrichment and reducing the missile stockpile. It now also includes the complete surrender or removal of all enriched uranium held by Iran, as well as stopping its support for proxy groups in the region. It's unlikely that Iran will agree, and because of this, in the coming days or weeks, the risk of an attack against Iran will remain high. The Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar is recognized as the largest military base in the United States region and has around 10,000 soldiers. And this is where the non-critical aircraft have already been relocated. Satellite images show this situation on the ground. The same movement is happening at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. And you wouldn't take this kind of step if a diplomatic agreement was about to be reached. Bases are cleared during studies if they're thought to be Iranian missile targets. For example, Al Udeid is less than 300 kilometers from Iran, and can be reached by a Shahab-3 missile in just 4 minutes. The evacuation of Al Udeid and other bases is a clear indication that the stage is being set for a major conflict. However, the most important question is not what the Pentagon is capable of, but what its true objective is. Strategy must come before action. Trump's exact goal is unclear. It may just be opportunistic, replacing the regime through a coup or removing people, up to forcing Iran to sign new nuclear agreements. If the goal is to destroy Iran's nuclear facilities and remove the missing enriched uranium, this would require the use of the B-2 bomber, the only aircraft capable of carrying the guided bomb unit, 57 Bunker Buster bomb, which is designed to penetrate deep and heavily fortified underground facilities. If the ultimate goal is regime change, its scope will expand even further. So, without clear and specific objectives, there is a danger that the use of military force could become an end in itself. After the United States conducted a raid in Venezuela, some are now saying that the United States might carry out an operation for regime change by targeting Iran's key leaders. Some believe that if an important figure in Iran's leadership is removed or ousted, the balance of power within their political system could be destroyed, and the remaining leaders might be forced to comply with America's conditions. However, an exfiltration mission similar to the operation that resulted in the capture of Nicolas Maduro in Caracas is unlikely to happen. United States helicopters would need to refuel inside Iranian territory itself because of its distance from Allied airfields in the Persian Gulf. Caracas is close to the coast, while the other is more inland and far from open waters. In fact, the need to refuel was one of the reasons why Operation Eagle Claw failed in 1980. The mission aimed at rescuing the United States Embassy staff who were taken hostage during the Islamic Revolution. Because of this, if there will be any overt military action against Iran, it will most likely be in the form of assassination strikes. However, there is a significant risk associated with this kind of action. First, ideology is deeply rooted in Iran. Any direct attack that would kill or remove a personality such as the supreme leader or a high-ranking military official could cause shock. However, it could also ignite even greater unity because of the culture of martyrdom in Shia Islam. Furthermore, even if the supreme leader, who is symbolically powerful, is removed, the government will not immediately collapse. Iran's political system is strong and institutionalized. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, has a contingency plan ready to immediately take position and consolidate control within the elite security and clerical circles. If the IRGC fully rises to power and de facto takes over the protection of the state, they themselves will also choose the new supreme leader. In this situation, the elimination of Iran's top leader will likely only cause a temporary crisis, while at the same time it further unites the hardliners and fuels broader nationalism and unity in the country. Another important consideration is the regional factors. There is a strong possibility that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and Kuwait will not allow their airspace to be used for an attack against Iran. This is understandable because if Iran retaliates, they will likely be the first to be hit, and they don't want to be involved in a direct conflict. And because of this, America's options are limited to 3 main approach routes. The first route is from the north. If coming from Europe, the United States B-2 Spirit could cross international airspace over the Black Sea and enter the airspace of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. It's unlikely that any of these countries would allow it. However, it's still possible for the United States to get through without being immediately detected because of the B-2's stealth capability. After hitting the target, the bombers could return via the same route or head further south toward the Indian Ocean. However, there's a major problem with this route. It's very close to Russian airspace. Russia could possibly detect the flight of the B-2S and immediately warn Iran. Because of this, it's considered a dangerous route. The second route, on the other hand, is through Israel, Jordan, and Iraq. Most of the United States tanker aircraft and heavy lift transporters, more than 3 dozen, are now headed to Jordan. This means that this central route is the most likely to be used. It's true that Iraq may not allow the use of their airspace, but their capability to detect and track stealth aircraft is limited. By using the B-2 Spirit F-22 Raptor and F-35 Lightning II, the United States could slip through this route and carry out attacks against Iran without being immediately detected. This is also the same corridor that was previously used in past attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities. This has been thoroughly tested and proven effective. However, since it's been used before, This move is now more predictable, and in war, being predictable can be a weakness. The third corridor instead goes through the Indian Ocean. This provides the greatest freedom of movement, because the airspace is more open and there are fewer direct obstacles from the countries involved. However, this also requires the most thorough logistical preparation. Longer distances, more refueling, and more complicated coordination. In the end, each route has its own strengths and weaknesses. And if there's one thing that's clear, it's that the outcome of any move will not just be a simple military maneuver, but a calculated decision that could change the balance of power in the entire region. The presence of the United States ship Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group in that part of the ocean clearly provides a significant advantage. This strengthens the option for the southern route and provides a more flexible deployment of forces. In fact, this is also the preferred option by many countries in the region because it reduces the possibility that they will be directly hit by Iran's retaliatory attack. If the offensive goes through the south, fewer countries need to be crossed by air, so their exposure to missile strikes or retaliatory action is lower. In addition, if the attack comes from the south, the United States can also use conventional bombers like the B-52 Stratofortress, which can carry heavier and more numerous weapons. This means that a wider range of firepower can be deployed compared to a purely stealth strike. Given the movements and preparations, multiple routes are likely to be used. There could be a combination of the central and southern corridors, a mix of stealth penetration and heavier bombing from those who are safe at a distance. This way, the enemy's defenses are divided and their response becomes more complicated. And to clarify, this analysis does not advocate for war. It is simply a realistic and objective assessment based on calculated interests and strategic necessities. There is no emotion or moral rhetoric involved, only an understanding of how states act when faced with major decisions. This is what the Americans might do because they see it as serving their interests. In any case, we're not advocating for war, but Trump may have a different perspective. If he continues with the plan and focuses solely on destroying Iran's nuclear facilities, the scope of the attack will likely remain limited. The entry and exit of B-2 Spirits would be enough to carry out the mission, a quick, precise, and target-specific operation. However, if the objective expands towards changing the RIMEN, the nature of the operation will completely change. If the United States decides to push for regime change in Iran, it may target the infrastructure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, command centers, and paramilitary officials. In targeting security forces responsible for the crackdown inside the country, such a move could cause temporary chaos and confusion within the system. There may be significant disorganization while reestablishing the chain of command. However, this does not automatically open serious negotiations or lead to the immediate collapse of the government. It is likely that the Iranians will act quickly to restore operational control and replace the commanders who have been ousted or eliminated. And instead of causing the state to collapse, this may further strengthen their internal structure and unity in the face of external threats. They did the same thing during the 12 Days War. During times of such temporary chaos, weapons may be brought to the protesters and the clashes between civilians and authorities may worsen. However, even so, this is still not enough to pose a serious threat to the government. For the government to truly be threatened, a widespread and sustained campaign focusing on Iran's military infrastructure, its security apparatus, and the political leadership over a long period of time is necessary. Just imagine that it would take several weeks or even months before it becomes a serious threat to the stability of Tehran. A one-off military strike really wouldn't make a significant impact. However, a sustained campaign that weakens the capabilities of Iran's military and confuses their security forces could create a power vacuum within the IRGC. In this situation, the remaining unit might be forced to negotiate and comply with the conditions set by external forces. Iran's response to all of this will likely depend on the extent of the damage sustained. At a low level of escalation, Iran might carry out a clearly limited attack, such as bombing a United States diplomatic or military target in Iraq, or obstructing commercial or military ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The goal of this is to re-establish deterrence while avoiding a wider war. A mid-level response from Iran could involve obvious attacks on United States military assets in the Gulf. This includes bases in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and Libya. However, such a move would immediately raise the risk of a wider conflict in the region. On the other hand, the Iranian leadership might choose a higher level of escalation, Although it's unlikely, they could possibly launch a sudden attack on American or Israeli targets, or try to block the Strait of Hormuz. This would likely trigger a full-scale war, but it would only happen if Tehran truly believes that their survival is at stake right in front of the United States. That's why there's another level of escalation, and both the United States and Iran will try to control their actions as long as the other side does the same. Meanwhile, Israel may join the American offensive, but their main missions are different. If the United States succeeds in the attack and helps overthrow the government within an hour of the transfer of power, the Israelis will launch an attack to destroy Iran's military infrastructure. In the brief moment of hope as Iranians celebrate the change and the command center is in confusion, Israeli jets immediately strike air defenses, missile launchers, drone factories, and more. No one will be spared. Everything will fall. It doesn't matter whether the new government is an ally or not. In just a few hours, 2 decades of Iran's military buildup will be gone. This is also what Israel did to Syria after Assad left, and this is also the plan for Iran. That's why the Israelis will be ready, armed, and have the field prepared for that exact window. This collapse will not only destroy Iran's military, but will also weaken the new government to the point that it can no longer recover in the geopolitical struggle. This is the arithmetic of strategy. While war causes casualties and depletes resources, it is often the spectators or third parties who benefit. So if you liked our video, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and feel free to share our video. Subscribe to our channel as well, and let's see each other again in our next video.